I want you to imagine that you've committed a crime and you're standing in court, so a decision needs to be made about your future. Who would you rather have deciding? A human judge or a computer judge? Now, I'm guessing that most people would rather have the human judge. But if we take that thought and hold it for just a minute, here's an interesting thing. Researchers at Columbia University, who examined more than 1,000 decisions made by 8 Israeli judges who ruled on convicts' parole requests, these researchers found that judges granted about 65% of those requests at the beginning of the day, but almost none at the end. Now, weirdly enough, that parole acceptance rate jumped right back up to 65% right after a snack break. So, the interpretation of this data, it's still being debated, but the most probable explanation is, you guessed it, hunger. So that means that whether or not someone potentially serves time in prison is at least partially determined by how hungry the judge is. And yeah, it gets way worse than that. For example, there's evidence to suggest that if you take the exact same case to the exact same judge, but on a different day, you'll get a different result. Studies have also found that judges don't like giving too many of the same decisions in a row. So if they grant 4 cases, they'll be a lot stricter on the 5th. My personal favorite, judges tend to be a lot stricter in towns where the local sports team has lost recently. And I say it's my favorite simply because of just how wrong it is. How can we tolerate a society in which whether or not someone serves time in prison is partially determined by whether or not the sports team lost? If I start talking about artificial intelligence, which is essentially human-like intelligence being displayed by a computer, if I start talking about that in government, everywhere else is fine for some reason. People tend to immediately jump to Terminator, right? A dystopic scenario in which humanity is completely squashed by killer robots, essentially. But you see, what I find really interesting about this prediction is that in many ways, AI is already in government. The Department of Energy in the US, they put together an AI model which helps them with forecasting. And this actually increases forecasting accuracy by 30%, which shouldn't really come as a surprise to a lot of people, because the weather industry is a place where AI really does shine. In fact, experts predict that this area will be largely automated within the next 5 to 10 years. The Las Vegas Health Department, they also put together an AI model, and this algorithm uses data from social media posts in order to fine-tune the selection of restaurants to inspect for public health violations. That's fascinating, isn't it? An algorithm can make meaning, can grasp relevant information simply from a bunch of unstructured, seemingly random social media posts. That's something that I don't think even a team of humans can get done based on just a day's worth of social media posts. If you think about just how much content is being put out there all the time, how could a team of humans possibly do that? Oh, by the way, the results of this AI being implemented, 9,000 fewer cases of food poisoning and 500 less cases of food poisoning admissions to hospitals. Hong Kong, they have a massive transit system across the country, and it needs to be managed. So, instead of 10,000 human staffers managing it, one AI system does it. And prior to this system being implemented, department heads had to meet up every week and literally chart out a schedule for the transit system. But now, that's all done by AI for a fraction of the cost. So with all these examples, we can make one definitive conclusion. namely that AI has a very promising future in the executive branch of government. This is the branch of government that, as the name suggests, get things done. But hold on, some of you might wonder. Why does AI have a future in just the executive branch? What about all the other areas of government? Why can't AI automate the whole government? Here's why. In 2003, a 19-year-old man, Christopher Drew Brooks, had intercourse with a 14-year-old and was accused of statutory rape because of the age difference. Now, a proprietary risk assessment algorithm called Compass determined that because he was so young and already doing this, he should be deemed high risk and thus be given 18 months jail time. In theory, there's nothing wrong with that. But here's the problem. This algorithm emphasized the man's age so much that in fact, had Christopher Drew Brooks been 36 years old, and hence 22 years older than the girl, the algorithm would determine that because he was older in doing this, he is therefore low risk, and that would have been enough for him to escape jail entirely. This is a perfect example of how algorithms, they don't understand context, they don't understand nuance of a given situation the way we humans do. And that can result in pretty disastrous consequences, as I've just shown. But the question I'm going to put forth to you is, okay, whose fault is that exactly? We'll come back to it later. But you see, this gray area, this moral gray area that we see with AI and government, it isn't just confined to the courts. The NHS in Scotland, which is the country's national health service, so they are responsible for the allocation of medical resources. They use AI-driven health monitors that do the allocations for them. Now, the obvious problem is that deciding where medical resources should go can sometimes mean choosing who gets to live and who has to die. How would an AI decide that? What logical processes would go through its brain in which it could output a result that we all agree upon? Should an AI even be allowed to decide that? But the real instance in where all this controversy surrounding AI government, that all came from London, specifically around policing. So for those of you who don't know, London is covered in CCTV cameras. The average Londoner is spotted by a CCTV camera around 12,000 times per day. So with all that footage coming in, the British police decided to implement AI systems into the cameras themselves. And the idea was that, okay, we have all this footage coming in, we should use AI so that it can help us catch criminals better, it can help us monitor suspicious behavior better, things like that. But once the public knew of this, there was complete outrage. A whole movement of privacy rights activists emerged in the wake of this. So with these examples, we can make two more conclusions. AI has potential in the legislative branch. This is the branch of government responsible for administering the laws. But there's work to be done and questions to be answered. The other one, this is the one I want to focus on a bit more. There are literally no examples of AI in the legislative branch. The branch of government responsible for actually creating the laws and policies. Why is that? Why can't AI have a future in this area? You know, earlier I said how, AI, it doesn't understand context. It just doesn't understand nuance the way we humans do. And earlier I asked, okay, yeah, whose fault is that? It's the fault of the programmer, right? Because the programmer, the human programmer, is responsible for making sure that the AI does understand context and does understand nuance. So if the AI fails to do that, that's the fault of the programmer. So really, when we say that we distrust AI, doesn't that mean that we actually distrust ourselves? That is, that we distrust ourselves to not program the AI right. But isn't that all the more reason to further embrace AI, so that AI can help us write out these biases and these errors and shortcomings that we feel AI will perpetuate onto us? And even though it sounds theoretical, there are actually some real-world examples of this. One that I like to bring up is Google's DeepMind. They put together a machine learning algorithm, meaning the algorithm can learn from experience. They put an algorithm to play Space Invaders. And this algorithm got so much better than humans at playing the game, after playing it for hundreds and hundreds of hours, that it was able to develop its own unique strategies for winning the game. But these strategies were completely new to humans. No one had ever thought of them before. And yet it was these strategies that led the algorithm to beat every single human on Earth at the game. Another rather more serious example, a study published just this month found that when you allow machine learning to scan X-rays, it will pick up on clues that human doctors often miss. And these clues are quite important for detecting lung cancer. So, as a result, the AI is better at detecting lung cancer. But you see, that's not all. You see, these clues that human doctors miss, but that AI scanners catch, these clues are actually the reasons for racial disparities that we see in the healthcare systems. The main concerns with AI being implemented into the government are concerns of errors, are concerns of shortcomings, and concerns of biases, all totally legitimate. But if an AI can look at an X-ray without being racist, if an AI can judge a person in court without concerning itself with the local sports game, then it seems to me that settling at humans to run these institutions will only keep us in a loop. It will keep us in a loop of humanity governing each other wastefully and cruelly, as we've done for hundreds of years now. Now, if we want to do away with these biases, if we want to get out of this loop, which I'm assuming that everyone does want to, then AI is the path forward to that.